Cheating is always bad. There is no excuse for it because absolutely everyone suffers from it. My wife was influenced by a bad man. My wife fell for the tricks without much doubt. And after that, almost 2 years later, their affair was revealed, and now my beautiful wife will have to bear the consequences for her infidelity.
I woke up in bed, feeling something moving near my feet. At first, I was surprised and disoriented, but then I realized where I was and smiled with satisfaction. His body was pressed against mine. His arm was wrapped around me. I gave in to become close. There was no resistance, as I still remembered last night. He hugged me, making love, knowing how much I liked it. After that, we just lay and hugged each other until we were interrupted by the morning alarm clock. Reality was crying out to us. My lover got up and went to his adjacent hotel room to prepare for the day ahead. We always booked 2 rooms with an adjacent door to avoid suspicion. It wouldn't be good if our connection was found out. I was Dan's executive assistant. We worked together for a little over 2 years and were lovers for most of that time. Due to my position, we had to work closely and often travel around the country to other offices, meet with clients, and attend industry sales conferences. It gave us a great opportunity to be together without arousing any suspicion. Yes, I was married, and I had a husband at home. My marriage was something like a no-rules wedding. I was still in high school and dated my first boyfriend, Alan. One evening, when my parents were not at home, one thing led to another, and soon I discovered that I was pregnant. By the time we confessed to our parents, it was too late to do anything but have a baby. My parents were furious and pressured me. His parents wanted us to keep him and even offered to take care of him until we graduated from high school. Alan stood by my side throughout the pregnancy, despite facing harsh criticism from other students and even teachers who called me names. He defended my honor in several fights and ended up suspended from school for a while. The birth was a frightening experience, but he never left my side. 2 days after my 16th birthday, we welcomed our beautiful baby girl Lauren into the world. Holding her in our arms, we knew we couldn't imagine giving her away. Initially, my parents all but disowned me. We moved in with Alan's parents and took on the responsibilities of parenting while finishing high school, with Alan's parents supporting us every step of the way. After finishing school, we both found jobs, had a simple wedding, and moved into our own tiny house. Our dreams of attending university had to be postponed once again when another unexpected event brought Lauren a little sister named Emma. To summarize, through years of hard work, juggling parenting responsibilities, and with support from our parents, we managed to earn our university degrees part-time, alternating between studying and working. During this time, we raised 2 amazing daughters. Our love for each other remained strong. Alan adored our 2 girls, and they had a very close bond. My relationship with them was more complex. We used to argue often, and I sometimes felt resentment towards them. Perhaps deep down, I blamed them for steering my life away from the path I had envisioned at 15. After graduating from university, I landed a position as executive assistant to Dan Johnson, the business development manager at a medical equipment company. At 29 years old, I found myself working closely with Dan, who was 38. Dan and I clicked right from the beginning. We quickly formed a strong professional partnership. I enjoyed my role immensely. Sales were thriving, management was pleased, and had given me a significant raise. For the first time, I felt like I had a stable, fulfilling life. My job involved frequent travel, often accompanied by Dan. It was exhilarating to visit new places across the country, meeting clients, negotiating deals, and mingling with top executives. I gained invaluable experience and relished every moment. I was away from home about 3 weeks out of every month, with trips ranging from 1 or 2 nights to entire weeks, sometimes including weekends. While the job and travel were thrilling, it meant I spent a lot of time away from my husband and daughters. Alan took on the bulk of parenting duties. Dan and I spent extensive time together and grew close. Despite our age gap, we found common ground, both having been married for a similar duration with young children. To ease Alan's concerns about my travels with Dan, I fibbed a bit, telling him I mostly traveled alone or with another female colleague. I also painted a picture that while Dan and I worked well together professionally, I didn't care for him personally. In truth, Dan was incredibly attractive to me, and I found him fascinating. I cherished our time together, especially our habit of discovering cozy restaurants during our travels, where we would spend hours talking over wine. One evening, about 6 months after I started working at the firm, Dan and I celebrated a major sales achievement with a sumptuous dinner and a bottle of expensive French champagne. As we sat across from each other, Dan reached out and gently placed his hand on mine. When he met my eyes, he confessed, "Amy, I'm head over heels in love with you." My heart was pounding wildly, leaving me speechless. After what seemed like an eternity, although probably only 15 seconds had passed, he stood up and held out his hand to me. I hesitated a bit before taking it, and together we headed to his hotel room. Once inside, we couldn't tear ourselves away from each other. It was a great night. In the morning, we woke up and shared tender moments with him, making love again before departure. It seemed to me that I fell into a state of pure euphoria. Since our flight was only late in the morning, we had breakfast in bed, enjoying each other's company before parting. On the way home, I struggled with guilt for cheating on my husband. Trying to justify it, I reasoned like this. When I was younger, I never had the opportunity to meet other men, and I felt that I deserved this experience at least once. In addition, I felt justified because our bed life had never fully recovered after the difficult first years of our marriage, largely due to my husband's neglect. It dawned on me that the night before I was so engrossed in Dan that I forgot to call my daughter and wish her a happy birthday. She had just turned 11 and was growing up so fast. Glancing at Dan, who was sitting next to me on the plane, he smiled and squeezed my hand. Despite feeling guilty and realizing that it was wrong, I felt a strong attraction. When I finally got home, the guilt came over me again. Alan was genuinely glad to see me after a week's absence, but I avoided his hugs and kisses. Later that night, when he tried to make love to me, I pushed him away, citing fatigue. I was really tired, but at the same time, I felt overwhelmed because of the stressful time with Dan. This was the first time I refused Alan. Returning to reality, we note that our romance, which began 18 months ago, was still going on without any signs of slowing down. Over time, I learned to manage my guilt and conceal my secret from Alan by shutting off a part of my emotions at home. Little did I realize then how much I was distancing myself emotionally from Alan and our daughters. My mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of Dan and our next opportunity to be together. Lying to cover it up became second nature, and the guilt began to fade. I fell head over heels in love with Dan, and from time to time I thought about leaving Alan to be with him. Sometimes, after making love and lying down together, we jokingly discussed this possibility, but we both knew that it would cause great pain, especially to our children. As our business expanded, we found ourselves traveling more frequently for work. On weeks without scheduled travel, we would fabricate overnight business trips and retreat to a hotel in a nearby city. We also occasionally took short vacations together to mark our anniversaries and birthdays, using the excuse of attending conferences in remote locations. These conferences were conveniently located at beautiful beach resorts far from home, ensuring we had a credible cover story. We were extremely cautious at work, maintaining a professional demeanor whenever others were present. We never sneaked away to meet in secret. Our lunch breaks were staggered, and we arrived and left at different times. We created private email accounts outside the company's IT system for communication. Outside of work, we never socialized in our town. During office events, we only interacted in large groups, never sitting together or engaging in private conversations. I would call home at a specific time each day to avoid interruptions. I never disclosed my whereabouts to Alan, and he never asked. At home, I complained to my husband about my strict boss and frequent travel demands. He often suggested finding a job with a nicer boss and less travel, but I argued that the job offered valuable learning experiences and a good salary, making it hard to leave. During occasional work gatherings where partners were expected, we were cautious in managing our demeanor and interactions. I introduced my husband to my boss, and he introduced his wife to us. We exchanged brief pleasantries before mingling with other colleagues, careful never to exchange lingering glances. We were meticulous in covering our tracks. No one suspected a thing. Alan, my husband, supported my career success, but was understandably frustrated by my frequent absences, which added to his responsibilities as an IT consultant and parent. Despite feeling love for Alan, I couldn't ignore the sense that we were growing apart. He was often occupied with our daughters and his work. I reluctantly acknowledged that our intimate moments had become rare and our closeness had faded. I silently resolved to find ways to reconnect with him.
We faced early challenges in life, having our first child at 16 and marrying at 18, followed closely by another child. Through perseverance and teamwork, we both managed to earn university degrees, me in IT and Amy in commerce, all while raising our 2 daughters. Despite the difficulties, our love kept us strong. Amy was ecstatic when she landed her first professional job 2 years ago, and I was incredibly proud of her achievement. Finally, we were both working in our fields, earning good salaries and looking forward to a more settled life together. Initially, I fully supported Amy's career, but over time, I started to feel resentful of the long hours and frequent travel her job demanded. She left home at 7 a.m. and often didn't return until 6 or 7 p.m. She traveled for work most weeks, sometimes staying away for several nights, and occasionally not coming back until Saturday afternoon. During the week, she either worked late or just relaxed in front of the TV after dinner. Saturdays were spent sleeping in and shopping, while Sundays began with a gym session followed by brunch with her friends. By the evening, she was usually too tired to go out with me. Our family didn't get to spend much quality time together. She always seemed too busy with work to take time off for vacations, so often the girls and I would go on holiday without her. I started noticing changes in her personality. The loving wife and mother I knew was gradually being replaced by someone who seemed selfish, frequently irritable, and distant in our home and bed. Our intimate life became mundane, and I found myself increasingly frustrated and unhappy. Whenever I tried to bring up my concerns, I was quickly shut down. She dismissed my worries as mere imagination or attributed them to my fatigue from work, emphasizing how hard she was working for us and insisting that our relationship was fine. I began to worry about where this was all heading. At the end of her first year at work, I had to attend the staff Christmas party at the CEO's mansion with her. It was there that I met her boss Dan for the first time, along with his wife. We exchanged polite but brief pleasantries before Dan excused himself to socialize further. My wife then directed me to join others while she engaged in conversation with her colleagues. Later, I found it odd. Amy had painted her boss as somewhat of a monster, but he appeared to be quite reasonable and friendly, albeit a bit reserved. Dan's wife was also pleasant. Given Amy's role as his executive assistant, I expected our conversation to be more than just polite. Yet, I sensed Amy's tension. When nervous, she tended to speak rapidly, a telltale sign. I couldn't understand why she would be nervous around her boss, considering their close working relationship. It puzzled me. Although I trusted her completely, I stored this observation away for later reflection. Over the next year, I was incredibly busy establishing my own IT consultancy and virtually single-handedly raising our daughters. Consequently, I set aside most concerns about Amy. Our life together mirrored the previous year. Amy traveled even more frequently and grew increasingly distant from all of us. I began to notice her attitude toward me becoming patronizing and dismissive. She showed little affection or love, and our intimate life was almost non-existent. Occasionally, I received perfunctory physical intimacy devoid of love or closeness. It became clear our relationship was falling apart. Towards the end of the year, I attended her staff Christmas party once more. Our interaction with her boss mirrored our last meeting. Later, a fleeting suspicion crossed my mind that she might be concealing something. It was the first time since we were 15 that doubts about her entered my thoughts. Could there be another man in her life? The idea was almost too overwhelming. We had faced countless challenges together and fought so hard as a team to get where we were now. Surely she wouldn't do that, would she? What should I do? I didn't resort to extreme measures like hiring a private investigator or hacking into her computer, but I did begin to observe her more closely. Yet I couldn't find anything amiss. Perhaps it was just my imagination, or she was incredibly adept at covering her tracks. Regardless, things between us were strained. Maybe I'd been too preoccupied to notice. Meanwhile, my daughters were growing up quickly. Lauren, now 15, was blossoming into a fine young woman, and Emma, at 12, was stepping into womanhood. We spent a lot of time together and grew very close, although sadly their mother seemed to have little time for them. Both girls were passionate about soccer, so every Saturday morning during the season I cheered them on at their games. It was a highlight of my week. Afterward, we'd grab lunch at their favorite Japanese restaurant and chat about their activities. I noticed they rarely spoke about their mother. Depending on the weather, we'd stroll along the beach, catch a movie, or they'd meet up with friends. After the end of the first game of the season, Emma came up to me leading a new member of the football team. This girl, Callie, was amazing. Tall, stunningly beautiful, with a wide smile, long dark hair and deep brown eyes. She was also impressively athletic, scoring 2 goals in her debut match for Emma's team. "Dad, this is Callie. Can I go to her house and chat with her this afternoon?" Emma asked eagerly. "Hi, Callie, nice to meet you. Of course, Emma, if Callie's parents don't mind," I replied. Callie turned around and called out, "Mom, can Emma come over this afternoon?" A woman who I assumed was Kelly's mother came up to us. To my surprise, she turned out to be an adult version of Kelly and absolutely amazing. She introduced herself to Sophie and quickly agreed for Emma to visit their house later that day. We chatted for a while, although I must admit I was a little excited, and my words probably didn't make much sense. When they left, my daughter burst out laughing at my embarrassment. Later that evening, Emma told me that Sophie was very sweet. She has been a single mother since Callie's father died in a car accident 3 years ago. Sophie raised Callie and her younger brother Tom, who was 11 years old, alone. The fact that she was a single mother definitely caught my attention. Next Saturday, while Lauren and I were watching Emma play her soccer game, Sophie approached us with her son and asked if they could join us. I had mentally prepared myself in case I saw her again, determined not to appear foolish like before. We talked throughout the game. Sophie had recently moved to town for a new job and hadn't yet made many friends. She was pleased that Callie had found a new friend in Emma and complimented me on Emma's good manners. After the match, Emma asked if Callie could come over to our house. "Sure, Emma, that would be wonderful, if it's okay with you, Sophie." "Absolutely. Why don't you come over now, Callie, and have lunch with us? Do you like sushi?" "Yes, I love it." "Great, it's settled. Actually, why don't all 3 of you join us for lunch?" I blurted out. "Thank you so much for the invitation, Alan, but I wouldn't want to impose on your family, so I'll pass," Sophie replied. I felt a bit disappointed, but Lauren intervened, saying, "No, please come, Sophie. It would be lovely to have you join us, and I could use some female company for a change. You wouldn't be intruding at all, please." Sophie looked at me. "If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding, Alan, I'd love to join you." I nodded awkwardly and muttered something incomprehensible once more. As we walked towards our cars, Lauren turned to me with a smirk and gave me a playful wink. Lunch was a great success. Most of the time, it was the 4 girls who did most of the talking, and we ended up chatting for nearly 2 hours. I think Tom enjoyed having another guy around, and we discussed computers and football among ourselves. At one point, Sophie casually asked my daughters if their mom ever came to watch their soccer games. Lauren's response caught me off guard. "No, never. She's not very interested in us, to be honest. She's only focused on her work and herself. Dad's like our mom, too. He's the one who takes care of us." Sophie gave me a curious glance. For the rest of the soccer season, it became our tradition to have lunch together after each game. Emma and Callie became close friends and would take turns visiting each other's homes after games and sometimes after school. Tom occasionally joined us with his sister, but he often preferred hanging out with me. We spent our time tinkering with computers, playing soccer, or going bike riding. I also noticed that Lauren frequently visited Sophie, and the 2 of them would sometimes go shopping together and then stop for coffee and chat. I noticed my daughters never mentioned Sophie to their mother, and neither did I. Sophie and I were becoming close friends. Both being single parents made it easier for us to support each other in raising our children. After the soccer season ended, our kids increasingly spent Saturday afternoons on their own adventures or visiting friends. With my wife usually not around, I had more free time. So Sophie and I started spending that time together, going for walks, having lunch, or watching movies. I found myself eagerly anticipating our time together more and more, realizing I was developing feelings for her. Despite this, we never crossed the line of friendship. One day, over coffee with Sophie, I expressed gratitude for her spending time with Lauren. "You know, she can't stop talking about you when she gets home. Sophie this, Sophie that," I chuckled. "Well, Tom never stops talking about you after he visits you. Alan this, Alan that," she laughed in return. "Seriously, he needs a male role model in his life, so I'm glad he has you." She suddenly expressed, "Alan, forgive me for being direct, but it's clear things aren't going well between you and your wife." Amy had been a topic we carefully avoided discussing. I sat silently for about 30 seconds. It was an issue I had ignored and avoided confronting for a long time. The truth is, Sophie, if it weren't for the girls, I probably would have left long ago. Things have been rough for years. I've tried talking to her countless times, but it's like hitting a brick wall. Our marriage was tough from the beginning. I suppose Lauren told you how Amy and I ended up getting married. Yes, and she feels somewhat responsible for the situation you're in. I've been trying to convince her it's not her fault at all. That opened the floodgates for me. I spent the next hour pouring out all my troubles to Sophie. Finally, she came over and held me tightly in her arms. It was the first genuine hug from a woman I'd had in ages. I'm here for you whenever you need me, Alan. You know that. I just held her tighter and couldn't let go. Not long after the year was drawing to a close and Amy's annual staff Christmas party rolled around once more. When I reintroduced myself to her boss, it felt eerily familiar, echoing the past 2 years. This time I was particularly vigilant. Despite Amy and her boss appearing more relaxed, something felt off. I harbored suspicions about their relationship. Later in the evening, as the party wound down, Amy excused herself to use the restroom. After a moment, I noticed her boss casually making his way upstairs. Curious, I followed and began searching. Not finding Amy in the restroom, I explored the expansive house. As I passed a slightly open bedroom door, I overheard voices inside. Peeking through the crack, I was stunned to witness Amy and her boss locked in a passionate embrace, hands roaming freely. Shocked, I withdrew quickly. Descending the stairs, my mind raced with conflicting emotions. Instead of confronting them immediately, I suppressed my anger and began to strategize. Amy returned shortly after, looking slightly flustered, and spent the rest of the evening pretending everything was normal, playing the role of the loving wife. And I, too, pretended as though I had seen nothing. By New Year's, while Amy slept, I managed to gain access to her phone and laptop. It turns out Amy should have been more cautious. Storing incriminating evidence on her personal devices, no matter how well hidden, wasn't wise given my profession, hacking computers. My worst suspicions were confirmed. Across her work, personal, and secret email accounts, there lay a damning trail. Amy had been deeply involved in a long-term, passionate affair with her boss for over 2 years. I discovered explicit photos and videos of their intimate moments, exposing the extent of her betrayal. Emails revealed discussions between Amy and Dan about the possibility of leaving their partners to be together. She appeared interested, though he was more cautious. I had truly been a naive, oblivious husband. Subsequently, I installed covert surveillance software on both her phone and laptop, allowing me to monitor her every electronic and physical move remotely, should I choose to do so. My marriage had clearly reached its end. My priority now was securing custody of my daughters and safeguarding my business and finances. As the new year began, I sought advice from a divorce lawyer. She explained that divorces were no fault, ruling out suing for adultery. Regarding custody, children over 14 could choose their living arrangements post-divorce. Additionally, she devised a plan to shield my business from financial implications of the divorce. Emma would turn 14 in 6 months. I resolved to endure living with Amy until then, using the time to prepare discreetly. When I shared this with Sophie, she burst into tears unexpectedly. I had thought I would be the more distraught one in need of comfort. I held her close as she tearfully revealed that her husband had died in a car accident with his secretary, whom he had been having an affair with. Finding out about the affair had compounded her grief. After she composed herself, we discussed my intentions to leave Amy. She responded with a knowing smile. To initiate my plans, I first persuaded my wife that, now that we were both earning well, it made sense to sell our small house and rent a larger one while we searched for our dream home. We intended to use the equity from the sale as a deposit for the new place, and she agreed without hesitation. Our house sold quickly, and we moved into a nearby rental property where I signed the lease for 6 months. Sharing a bed with Amy at home made me feel incredibly nauseated. When we moved into the rental, I caught a severe cold. I used this as an excuse to move into the spare room to avoid getting her sick. Surprisingly, I never returned to our shared bed, and she never brought it up. Perhaps she didn't notice or even preferred it that way. Next, I involved my father, whom I had confided in, to start a new IT company with him as the owner and me as the sole employee. I then closed down my own company and transferred my business operations to his new company. Everything was proceeding according to plan until I was approached by a visibly nervous Lauren. She hesitantly revealed to me that her mother was having an affair with her boss, triggering a strong sense of déjà vu from a past experience. I was shocked by what she knew, and for a moment I was confused. Really, why do you think that? Well, right after we moved here, Emma and I went back to our old house to pick up something she had forgotten. Mom and her boss were there. Well, it's a little weird, but it doesn't prove anything. They did it on the living room floor. After I recovered from the shock, mostly from what my 16-year-old daughter knew, I said, "I know about their affair, Lauren. I've known about it for a while." "Then why don't you do something about this cheater?" "Did Emma see her too?" "Yes." I beckoned Emma, who had been discreetly lurking just around the corner, and she timidly entered the room. I embraced them both warmly. I understood how unsettling it must have been for them to witness what happened, especially young Emma. "Can you promise to keep a very important secret?" They both nodded. "I am planning to leave your mother soon. I'm waiting until Emma turns 14 so that you both can legally decide who you want to live with." "With you!" they exclaimed simultaneously. "Keeping this secret won't be easy, but we mustn't do anything that might alert your mother until then." They exchanged knowing smiles. Later, I asked Sophie to have a heart-to-heart with Lauren. Now that she had her first boyfriend, I didn't want her to follow her mother's path. Luckily, Amy wasn't around often, so we endured her occasional presence and kept our secret. We relished our time together even more when she was away, knowing that our situation would soon change. We were increasingly spending time with Sophie and her 2 children, sharing meals at each other's homes and going out together. One Friday afternoon, while my wife was supposed to be at a weekend conference but was actually having a rendezvous with her boss at a hotel, Lauren informed me, "Dad, I'm babysitting for Sophie tonight." "Oh, what's Sophie up to?" I asked. "She's going on a dinner date with a guy to Brasserie Paris, that fancy French place in town." Instantly, jealousy surged through me, though I tried unsuccessfully to hide it. My daughter gave me a knowing look. "She's going out with you, dummy. It's about time you both had a proper date. I've already made the reservation, so just call her and ask her out properly," she said, handing me my phone. "But what if she doesn't want to go on a date? We're just friends after all. I don't want to make things awkward." "I can't believe you made it through university sometimes. Just call her," she insisted. I dialed Sophie's number, and to my surprise, she sounded thrilled and agreed immediately. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't much of a surprise to her at all. That evening, it took 3 attempts before my daughters were satisfied with my choice of attire for dinner. Just as I was preparing to leave, Callie and Tom arrived unexpectedly. Lauren explained with a smile, "Oh, I forgot to mention, they're having a sleepover here tonight, so don't worry about coming home late or at all if you'd prefer." She handed me a packed overnight bag. Clearly, all our children were in cahoots. When I arrived at Sophie's, she greeted me at the door in a stunning black cocktail dress that accentuated her athletic figure. Her long black hair was elegantly braided and swept to one side. "Well, what do you think, Alan?" I'm speechless. "Do you like it?" she asked, spinning around. "I do, Sophie, more than like." We had an incredible dinner and thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. As we stood at her front door at the end of the evening, I began, "I know our kids set me up to stay over, but you don't have—" She gently silenced me with a finger on my lips. "Shh, I want you to stay," she whispered, leading me inside and up to her bedroom. I wasn't about to argue with that. At first we were a little restrained and uncertain. It was the first time for both of us with someone new. If I thought she was beautiful before, then seeing her without outerwear was beyond words. It didn't take us long to relax and give ourselves completely to each other. I got rid of all the accumulated mental stress and felt like I was in heaven. By the end, I was completely exhausted. The next morning, we made love again. After that, we lay in bed for a long time. It's been a long time for both of us, and we felt incredibly satisfied and absolutely right. We heard the sound of multiple footsteps on the stairs, voices outside, and a knock on the bedroom door followed by it swinging open. Lauren poked her head in. "Good morning, you two. It's almost 10 and we got tired of waiting, so we came over. Breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Oh, and I'd ask if you had a good evening, but judging from your expressions, I think I already know," she said with a grin. Laughter echoed down the hallway as they departed. How did we end up with such amazing kids, Sophie? The breakfast they prepared was delicious, and it was heartwarming to enjoy it together as a family. Later at home, I attempted to explain to my daughters what had transpired between Sophie and me. After all, technically, I was being unfaithful to their mother. They both exchanged amused glances and chuckled at my discomfort. "Dad, it's time for you to find happiness again. Besides, you're not really married to Mom anymore. She left you ages ago. So, what's the plan, you co-conspirators?" "We're all in agreement, actually. Emma and I need a mother, and Cassie and Tom need a father. You and Sophie are meant to be together. So it's a win-win for everyone. Even if I thought that was a good idea, Sophie might not." "Dad, really? Even you should know how she feels about you and what she wants. Do I get a say in this?" "Nope, none at all, Dad." Their expressions revealed they found it all quite amusing. I was completely under the rule of my daughters now. A few days later, during a family dinner, I mentioned that I planned to start looking for a new house next weekend. Sophie inquired about what type of place I had in mind. "I want it to be close to the beach, 2 stories high, with a spacious family room, a playroom for the kids, a large backyard, and a pool. It should have at least 6 bedrooms, just in case my family expands in the future," I explained. Looking directly at Sophie, I added, "And of course I want to ensure that a certain woman I might be falling head over heels for likes it too." Sophie gazed back at me intensely for a full minute, then walked over and kissed me passionately right in front of the children. When we finally came up for air, they were silently watching us, then erupted into joyful dancing around us. I took that as a yes. After a few weeks of searching, we found the perfect place. We decided to purchase it together, using some of her late husband's life insurance money and the proceeds from selling my house as the deposit. Everything was now set for the confrontation with Amy. As Emma's 14th birthday, referred to as D-Day, drew near, Amy informed everyone she was heading to a 7-day sales conference on the West Coast. However, upon checking her emails later, it became clear she was actually planning a holiday with her boss to celebrate their 3rd anniversary on the island of Bali in Indonesia. To avoid suspicion at work, they had separately informed colleagues they were taking vacations with their families due to their demanding work schedules. Amy would depart a day earlier than her boss and travel alone to Bali, with him following a day later. To maintain the illusion, Amy would return to work a day earlier than her boss. Their efforts at deception were slipping. Their usual meticulousness was lacking, making it vulnerable to discovery if scrutinized. Amy departed under the guise of attending her conference, prompting immediate action from others to pack and move belongings to their new home where Sophie and her children had settled a month earlier. As fate would have it, on the very evening of Amy's arrival in Bali, Mount Agung, an active volcano there, erupted violently, sending plumes of volcanic ash into the sky. All flights to and from Bali were promptly canceled. Amy found herself stranded alone in Bali, her lover stuck at home. It was a twist of irony so perfect I laughed until tears came. The volcano continued to erupt, resulting in ongoing flight cancellations that kept the lovers apart. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I amused myself by checking her emails and messages daily. The couple, understandably, were frustrated by the situation. Amy, increasingly irritable, seemed to blame Dan for their predicament. Whenever she called from the conference, she would go on about how busy she was, with me feigning interest. Strangely, I began asking detailed questions about her hotel in the city, probing for inconsistencies. Later, when I remotely accessed her laptop, I discovered frantic internet searches made during our calls, likely to fabricate convincing responses. Meanwhile, our family of 6 had settled comfortably into our new home. Taking legal action, I had my lawyer file for a legal separation, and I secured interim custody of our daughters after submitting their signed preferences to live with me. As Amy's return date neared and flights remained grounded, I wondered how she would manage. One evening, she called to explain she had made significant business connections at the conference, prompting her boss to extend her stay for follow-up meetings. She sounded nervous, but fortunately it was just a phone call. A video call would have revealed my amusement. I assured her everything was fine on my end, and that I understood her situation. As the week passed with Amy still stranded in Bali, I observed a flurry of frantic emails and messages exchanged between the two lovers. Her boss informed everyone at her workplace that she needed to extend her leave due to a family emergency. He personally called me to express profuse apologies for keeping Amy away from home for so long, citing it as a crucial opportunity for the company and so on. I had anticipated his call and was ready to respond, playing the role of a supportive husband to a career-driven wife. I assured him I understood completely. Then, casually, I inquired about Amy's whereabouts, He stumbled, fabricating a few locations. I later shared this with Amy, having intercepted his email revealing her supposed locations. My objective, naturally, was to unsettle her and plant seeds of doubt that she might have been found out. Whenever she called, I maintained a facade of understanding, but subtly probed her about the local attractions in the places she claimed to be staying. I could discern what she had researched beforehand, so I threw in a few unexpected questions, relishing her attempts to evade them. I pretended to be oblivious. During one conversation, I remarked, "Hey, Amy, have you been following the news about those people stuck in Bali because of the volcano?" There was a brief silence, followed by her response, "Oh yes, but I haven't really been keeping up with it. One of my co-workers has been stranded there for a fortnight. Remember Paul Howard and his wife? We met them about 6 months ago." "Oh, yes. We're collaborating on a project together, and he's having to work remotely from his hotel in Nusa Dua. At least the Grand Hyatt isn't a bad place to be stuck." I heard Amy squawk on the line. Of course, that was the same hotel she was staying at. Paul wasn't even on Bali, though she didn't know that. Right after the call, she relocated to a cheap hotel on the other side of the island. She must be hoping she could get away with it. Naturally, my 5 daughters and my son found the whole situation hilarious. Yes, Sophie's kids were now mine. Finally, nearly 3 weeks later, the volcano stopped erupting and flights from Bali resumed. Amy called to say her work was done and she'd be back Friday afternoon. I waited for her at our rented house, which was now empty. I had planned this confrontation meticulously. As she walked in, I was seated at the kitchen table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She looked tired and incredibly nervous. Despite supposedly being on business for 3 weeks, she had a deep tan. I skipped the usual peck on the cheek. "Wow, you got quite a tan on your business trip. Did you manage to get any work done?" She stammered something, turning red. "Please join me for a glass of wine," Alan invited as he poured wine into his own glass and took a sip. "Alan, I'm really tired. I just want to go upstairs, take a shower, and rest before dinner." Amy sighed. "I'm sorry, but we really need to talk now. It can't wait," Alan insisted. "The girls are staying overnight with a friend, so we'll have some privacy." Amy's expression turned to one of genuine fear. She thought her secret might be out and Alan was about to confront her. Little did she know what was coming next. Reluctantly, Amy sat down as Alan poured her a glass of wine. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind countless times, perfecting his apologetic demeanor. "You know things between us haven't been right for a while, Amy. Do you know why?" Alan began gently. Amy looked terrified and barely managed to croak out a no. "I'm really sorry to have to say this, Amy," Alan continued with a heavy heart. "I can't sugarcoat it. I've met someone else. I love her, and I want to be with her. So I've decided to leave you." Shock washed over Amy's face, replacing her fear with speechless fury in an instant. Alan maintained his apologetic tone. "I never meant for this to happen. You were often away, and I guess I felt lonely." "How could you do this to me, Alan? After everything I've done for you, who is she? Are you sleeping with her?" Amy unleashed her anger, her words a mix of hurt and betrayal. Alan sat silently, his expression sorrowful, as Amy vented for several minutes. "I can see you're very angry, and I understand," Alan finally said. "There's no point in continuing this conversation now. I'll come back tomorrow afternoon around 4 and we can talk more. There's a lot we need to discuss." I left behind the angry outburst and returned to my new home. A barrage of furious texts and voicemails followed me, but I chose not to respond. Back at home, everyone was eager to hear how it went. My response was simple, even better than expected. We had pizza for dinner and watched a movie together. The girls turned off their phones to avoid their mother, although I had insisted they stay in touch with her. Why didn't I confront her about the affair? Because letting it linger would be more agonizing for her. That night, Sophie and I shared a tender moment. All my worries and stress seemed to melt away. Amy who? The next afternoon, I arrived at my old place armed with a folder of papers. Amy greeted me, still visibly upset, alongside her friend Claire, whom I never cared for. Claire, a lawyer, had evidently taken the role of spokesperson and decided that offense was the best defense. She launched into a tirade about what a terrible person I was, extolling Amy's virtues as a wife and mother, accusing me of exploiting her while she tirelessly worked for our family. She threatened that if I didn't beg for her forgiveness, she would take everything in the divorce, including the girls, ensuring I'd never see them again. What hypocrites. Clearly, they assumed that after last night I would have exposed Amy's affair with her boss. I wore a sorrowful, apologetic expression tinged with curiosity. Amy, I understand this must be painful for you, but I'm surprised by how angry you are. For a while now, I've felt that you haven't loved me the same way anymore. Both physically and emotionally, you've been absent from our marriage for the past 3 years. That's absolute nonsense, Alan. I've been there. I know I've been working a lot, which keeps me away, but I've been doing it for us. Then tell me, Amy, when was the last time we made love? Amy remained silent. I can tell you when. It was 3 years ago. It's not true. We were really close. Yes, we were close sometimes, but I'm talking about making love. I can pinpoint the last time. Remember 3 years ago when you were on a business trip and forgot to call Emma on her 11th birthday? She tried calling you several times that evening and couldn't reach you. She was so upset. I remember it vividly because Emma's birthday was 2 weeks ago, and while you were away, you forgot to call her again. It felt like an unfortunate anniversary for us. She looked at me guiltily. Since you returned from that trip 3 years ago, things between us have never been the same, and I've always wondered why. Their expressions showed my words had hit home. They appeared uneasy, exchanging glances. After all, Amy, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for about 6 months. It seems you haven't been bothered by that. I can't recall our last outing together or vacation. It's almost as if your work is where you take your breaks. They both flinched. When you're home, you seem distant, not just from me, but from your daughters, too. Internally, I smiled as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Anyway, Amy, I'm sorry, but I'm moving forward. I hope we can make this separation as smooth as possible for the girl's sake. There's really no chance of reconciliation. Who is she? Do I know her? You've met her daughter, Callie, a few times. She's Emma's best friend. Her mother, Sophie, and I met at Saturday soccer last year and became friends. Our friendship grew, and we eventually realized we were in love. We've been having an affair, and recently we decided to move in together. Before they could respond, I placed a large indexed folder on the table. I have organized some documents and information for you. Tab A contains the legal separation agreement I filed in court 2 weeks ago. Tab B is an application for divorce that requires your signature. The sooner you sign it, the sooner we can proceed. Tab C outlines a proposed financial settlement. Tab D is a new rental contract for this house. Our current lease expires in 3 weeks, so if you wish to stay, you'll need to renew it in your name. Additionally, Tab D includes all utility contracts. I've notified them of termination in 3 weeks, so renewal in your name will be necessary if you choose to remain. Tab E consists of bank statements. I've withdrawn 60% of the funds from our joint accounts. The credit cards under your name are now your responsibility. Finally, Tab F contains an interim custody and child support order from the court. The girls have chosen to live with me, so I have custody, and child support will be deducted directly from your paycheck. Visitation arrangements are flexible to accommodate our needs as we work through this. They were shocked at how prepared I was. Claire erupted. You conniving bastard. You've been planning this for ages. You won't get away with it. We'll make sure you pay for this. We'll take your IT company, your girls, and your money. Well, yes, I've been planning this since Christmas, really, I calmly responded. I had a moment of clarity at your staff Christmas party, Amy. It became clear to me that our relationship was over, and it was time to take action. I noticed Amy trying to recall the events of that evening. So the idea of selling the house to buy another was just a ruse then, remarked Claire. I simply smiled. As for screwing me over, Claire, I don't have a company anymore. I closed it months ago. I work for someone else now. Sophie and I bought a new house to live in after filing for legal separation. So it's not considered a marital asset. Since I have legal custody of the girls, I use 60% of the house sale money to buy our new place. So I'm not sure what you can really do, Claire. By the way, according to state law, once children are over 14 years old, they can choose who they want to live with. They chose me. You're a real piece of work, Alan. I bet you've poisoned the girls' minds against Amy. I wouldn't do that. I'm not that cruel. Besides, even if I wanted to, there's no need. Amy has managed to do that all on her own by neglecting them these past 3 years. Amy, you have a lot of work to do with them to regain their trust. It's crucial for their well-being to have a good relationship with their mother. She hasn't neglected them. She's a good mother. That's not how they see it, Claire. She's been virtually absent from their lives for years. Amy, ask yourself who provides for them, who takes them to sports, who packs their school lunches, Who helps with their homework, who buys their clothes, who never forgets their birthdays and gets them gifts? Who goes to movies with them? Who do they turn to with their problems, who guided them through their first periods, and who gives them love and affection? The list goes on. Well, Amy remained silent, clearly struggling to process what had transpired. The girls asked me to invite you to brunch tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at Beachside Cafe. It was actually my suggestion that they meet you because they're not really keen to see you. So should I tell them that it's okay? She simply nodded. I left them both and went back to my family. The next day, the girls reported that Amy had spoken ill of me the entire time and insisted they move in with her. Eventually, they excused themselves to the restroom and quietly slipped away. What baffled me was why she wanted to reconcile. She hadn't shown interest in me for years. Maybe I was just a convenient childminder and housekeeper.
Alan's announcement that he was leaving me for another woman was a complete shock. How could he? I thought he loved me. Despite my attempts to reconcile, he showed little interest, and our only interactions were when he picked up or dropped off our daughters for visits. My girls were openly hostile towards me, making those times together unpleasant. On one occasion, after dropping them off, they ran happily to their new stepmother and hugged her, seemingly to spite me. Eventually, I decided they shouldn't visit until they wanted to. I had always imagined my life continuing as it had, with my lover for pleasure and my husband caring for me at home. Alan's departure hit me hard emotionally. Over the following months, as I reflected on it, I realized it shouldn't have been such a surprise. Alan was right. I had been emotionally absent as a wife. I had focused most of my love, intimacy, and attention on Dan for the past 3 years, leaving little for Alan. The real surprise was that he stayed with me for so long. Unable to afford the rent and child support alone, I moved into a small, old apartment. Nights were spent alone, watching TV and eating unhealthy takeout. Dan's behavior also changed after Alan left. Suddenly, he was often too busy with his own family to spend time with me, despite my newfound availability. He frequently sent me on business trips alone, claiming I could handle clients myself. When we were together, the emotional connection had faded, reducing our interactions to mere physical encounters that weren't as fulfilling as they once were. About 6 months after my marriage ended, Dan informed me he was leaving his job to take a position at a different company in another city. I tearfully told him to never contact me again. Before I knew it, I was officially divorced. I couldn't help but recall a line from a Joni Mitchell song. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? I had naively believed I could have everything my way. Seeing Alan now with a stunning woman who was genuinely kind and impossible to dislike only added to my insecurities. He looked genuinely happy with his new partner. I remember he used to look at me like that when we were young parents struggling to raise our 2 kids. No matter what challenges we faced, we fought through them together, and we were happy and in love. How did I let that slip away? My 2 daughters seemed much happier too. They treated Sophie like their mother, not me. I felt like a bothersome relic from their past that they felt obligated to see occasionally. That hurt deeply. I felt like I had hit rock bottom when I was venting to my friends about my situation. Lauren gave me a cold look. Well, you did cheat on Dad, after all. I know I wasn't a perfect wife, and I neglected all of you, but he was the one who left me for another woman. Mom, he left you because you were having an affair with your boss for 3 years. The horror on my face said it all. I felt deeply ashamed. Alan had known all along but never said a word. My life was a mess. I had truly messed up and lost a great husband and my daughters. True to his word, Alan encouraged our daughters to keep in touch with me. He was right. I had a lot of work to do to earn their trust back. Slowly, they started visiting without coercion and sometimes even stayed the night. One evening, as I dropped the girls off at their new home, I asked Alan if we could talk for a moment. He walked out to the car with me. I turned to him and said, "Lauren told me that you knew about Dan and me. I am so, so sorry, Alan. You were a good husband, and you didn't deserve that from me. I was selfish and ungrateful, and I got what was coming to me." He simply nodded. "Why didn't you tell me you knew Alan? Maybe you could have intervened early enough to save our marriage." By the time I found out, it was already too late for that. When did you find out? I caught you with your boss when you sneaked away together at your office Christmas party last year. I didn't let on that I saw you. After that, I started digging and uncovered everything that had been going on between you two. I felt deeply embarrassed and ashamed. I must admit, I found it somewhat satisfying when you got stranded alone in Bali. Oh God, I feel awful. You must hate me. Why didn't you confront me? I was furious and wanted you to feel the pain I felt, to get some payback. I did some digging and discovered that you weren't the first secretary he had been involved with. He has a history of using and discarding women. I decided the best way to punish you was to stay silent and let things play out. Knowing his past, I figured if your affair remained a secret, he would likely keep you hanging on for a while and then eventually move on to someone new. I worried that if I made a scene, his wife might find out and divorce him, freeing him to be with you without consequence. Plus, I thought it would hurt you more to think I had simply left you for another woman. I have to admit, your plan worked perfectly. You got your revenge, Alan. My life has completely fallen apart. Looking back now, I do feel somewhat sorry that you were hurt so badly. Well, a little sorry to be honest. I don't need your apology. It was my mistake. If you had done what I did, I would have left you. Looking back, I was drawn in by the thrill of it all and became addicted. I tried to stop early on, but by then it was too late. I became so obsessed with him and consumed by my desires that I forgot about you and our daughters for a while. I've let go of my anger now, Amy, and I forgive you. I've also become more philosophical, I suppose. After all, if you hadn't cheated on me, I wouldn't be with Sophie now. Yes, that part hurts the most. Our marriage was challenging from the beginning, Sophie, so I don't think you're entirely at fault. Yes, you made a terrible mistake, but he was very skilled at seduction. You never had the chance to grow up normally, to enjoy all the things teenagers do, especially to date and discover who you truly wanted to be with for life. You were vulnerable, and your boss took advantage of that. You're probably right, Alan, but why did you have to tell the girls about him? That was unnecessarily harsh. No wonder they hated me. I didn't tell them, Amy. They found out on their own. What? How? They unexpectedly went back to our old house and caught you two in the act in the living room, just after we had moved out. Initially, I couldn't remember. Then the memory hit me with horror. What did they see? Pretty much everything, even Emma. Lauren gave me a very detailed description of what happened. My entire body seemed to collapse beneath me, and I began to cry uncontrollably, as if from the depths of my soul, oblivious to everything around me. I lost track of time as tears streamed down my face until I felt Alan's arms around me, holding me tightly with my head buried against his chest. His familiar touch and scent triggered another wave of tears. I vaguely remember being lifted up and carried inside, where I was gently laid down on the couch. I felt overwhelmed with guilt. Everyone, including Alan's new partner Sophie, was incredibly kind and supportive. She insisted that I stay to calm down, and later, after I had composed myself, she insisted I stay for dinner. Sitting at the table with Alan and his new family, I couldn't help but notice how genuinely happy he looked. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had messed everything up. As I walked out to my car later that evening, Alan placed his hands on my shoulders. Amy, I don't want you to continue blaming yourself and being unhappy. We faced immense challenges when we became parents and committed to each other at such a young age. Considering everything, our marriage lasting 14 years was a testament to both of us. Let's focus on the positives. Our mistakes gave us two beautiful daughters who have grown into wonderful young women. That's a legacy from our marriage that no one can ever take away. Indeed, Alan, you're correct. Speaking of mistakes, I need to confess another one. Sophie is pregnant, so we're moving up our wedding date. You seem to have a knack for mistakes. You're a wonderful man and husband, Alan, much better than I ever deserved. I truly wish you all the best. I hugged him, kissed him on the cheek, and then walked away. My position had surely been filled. Now, my only hope was to find another man as exceptional as him, but that seemed highly unlikely.
Why did I forgive her so easily? There were several reasons. Firstly, because holding on to hate can consume and embitter you. Secondly, seeing me with Sophie was a constant reminder of the consequences she faced. Despite everything, I had once loved her, and our bond still lingered. Though I had initially wanted to exact revenge on Amy, my true target was her boss, Dan, who had stolen her away from me. I managed to infiltrate his computer by disguising an email as Amy's, containing a hidden Trojan that granted me unrestricted access. Through this, I uncovered his quiet embezzlement schemes from both his former and current employers. Armed with substantial evidence, I anonymously alerted both companies and the authorities. Confronted with overwhelming proof, Dan confessed during his trial and received a 7-year prison sentence. Throughout the legal ordeal, his wife stood by him, visiting him in prison with their children. I met her later, revealing evidence of his numerous affairs. Enraged, she promptly decided to leave him. To complete my vendetta, I visited Dan in prison. Initially unaware of who I was, he greeted me with hostility. "Hi, Dan, we've actually met before. I'm Amy's ex-husband." "What the shit do you want, jerk?" "To deliver a message, firstly from my former wife, Amy. She sends her regards and hopes you're enjoying your new accommodations here, which I personally helped arrange for you." "What? You really should have hired a professional to encrypt your computer. It took me only 15 minutes to decrypt all the data after I hacked it. I couldn't resist sending this information to the police." After he finished scolding me, I continued. "I also paid a visit to your wife and took the liberty of showing her all those compromising photos and videos that I found about you and your girlfriends. Needless to say, she was furious with you. She insisted that we take revenge right in your bedroom, and I couldn't refuse. Impossible. She wanted me to show you this." I spread out the photos in front of him. They were, of course, fakes created with Photoshop, but he didn't know that. "She asked me to tell you that she will never visit you again, and you will not see your children either." I gave her the contact information of my lawyer for the divorce proceedings. His expression was priceless. Yes, revenge is really a dish that is better served cold.